Are comics hard to get into? Not really, no, kinda, maybe it's complicated. Discourse about comics, while mind-numbing, is nothing new. Is Batman a bad guy? Are the movies being decided by the comics, or is it the other way around? Are the X-Men a good metaphor? I don't know, let's ask Kitty Oh no. But the one thing you constantly hear people say ad nauseum is that comics are too hard to get into. You have to go through reboots, events, thousands of issues. The moment you show anyone a reading guide, they'll look at you like this and give up entirely. But what if I told you it's easier to get into comics than you think? And that's what I want to talk about today. How do you even get into comics? Where do you even start? Do you have to be literate? Judging by me, probably not. It's very much true that both Marvel and DC have been going on for a while. Look at Batman, one of the most popular superheroes, was created all the way back in the 30s. And characters like Spider-Man and Captain America aren't too far off. With multi-generational storytelling, it may feel more like playing constant catch-up that these two are massive mountains that one has to be scaled one issue at a time. It's not one linear track either. Say if you wanted to go through an event, you're going to have to traverse around tie-ins, jump from book to book, authors, even entire storylines that you couldn't care less about, all to understand the character that you wanted to know in the first place. It's been a pretty big problem, especially for Marvel nowadays, where entire line events will happen every 3 months, and when you only get one issue a month, you could already see the problem. There's this feeling that because you were not born during the Great Depression, you somehow missed out on two things: measles and getting into comics. But maybe Marvel and DC aren't that dumb. Just maybe they're aware of this problem. Shocker, I know. Now, before I get hundreds of comments saying the same thing, this problem is only a big 2 problem. Indie comics don't have to deal with this, and I agree. Most indie comics are made digestible, shorter, and offer more variety, as comics have so much to offer and you can easily find something that both piques your interest and something entirely new. But even with that, comics aren't as connected as one might assume. Sure, it's a shared universe, and if you're going to read something like an event, you're going to have to do some prior reading. What I'm saying is that if you pick up Iron Man and see Captain America, it does a pretty good job of explaining who is who. At worst, it'll just have an editor note telling you to read whatever ongoing is running at the time. Also on DC's side, for the last couple of years, they've been really good at keeping their compendiums in print. These are issues compiled into one easy book that follows a complete story where you don't need an entire history lesson to enjoy them. They're constantly coming out with new ones. Marvel, on the other hand, sometimes they'll do one. Keeping it in print is even more rare. Or if you don't have space or you just prefer to read digitally, there are certain websites where you can easily find on Google. You can purchase a monthly subscription for an online database of Marvel and DC massive libraries of comics. But you might say, what do you know? You just make YouTube videos, you freaking goober. But don't take my word for it. Take someone who actually read every single Marvel comic. Enter Eisner winner Douglas Walk, author of All the Marvels, a novel documenting his experience with the Marvel Universe and a thorough examination of its place in American culture throughout the decades and how they reflected the times when they were being made. But what's important for this video in particular is how he outlined 3 different methods in tackling the massive mountain that is Marvel Comics. The first being starting from the very beginning. On paper, this makes sense. People are somewhat naturally drawn to the origins of these characters. Every other piece of media starts at the first release, so why not comics? But please do not do this. You are essentially starting at the base of the mountain, a path that is old, winding, and almost archaic. It's an undertaking to get through actual decades worth of reading. A lot of these early works also rarely reflect the most popular iterations of these characters. Say if you really enjoyed X-Men 97 and wanted to jump straight into the X-Men with their first run, you would quickly be dismayed because it barely resembles what you know the X-Men for. You would be more used to the Claremont era of the X-Men because that's mostly what the animated series took from for their storyline ideas, rather than the Stan and Kirby version of the characters. It's almost antithetical to everything you've been taught. Every other form of fiction is concise and clear. Start from episode 1, the first movie, the first game in a series. It's like telling someone to start at Empire Strikes Back instead of New Hope because you missed out on it. Sure, you may not be entirely lost narratively, but it would be a hell of a lot more enjoyable if you started from the first movie. Comics weren't made with this idea of having a long-spanning story. Most comic stories from the 40s through the 60s were made as a one-off. While each issue did build to a larger universe, they rarely intended you to follow one issue at a time. Comics were seen as cheap entertainment, not too dissimilar from the yellow journals that stood next to them at the newsstands. They were made with the idea that when kids were done reading them, they would immediately toss them. There's a reason that this Amazing Fantasy 15 I'm using as a prop required me to take out a second more. When a comic was off the newsstand, that was it. Rarely comics were ever reprinted during this era. You were supposed to move on to the next comic when it came out. Comics were written with that in mind. They expected you not to keep up with every single issue. A lot of comics assume that every comic is somebody's first, and that's still the motto today, that you can grab an issue from the shelf and jump right in. While a part of a larger universe, and they do interact with one another, they leave enough room open for you to get comfortable with all the interwoven stories and characters at a given time, so you don't have to jump in head first. I think a lot of the confusion stems from trying to understand comics in a chronological order when Marvel and DC kinda have different meanings of it. You can go by issue number, order of events, or even continuity, and you would be right in one sense and wrong in the other. I think a good example of what I'm trying to get across is the spectacular Spider-Man story, Death of Jean DeWolf. At first glance, it might seem inaccessible to new readers. It takes place in the middle of Peter's Black Suit era, focuses heavily on his supporting cast, and even brings in Daredevil as a major player, in some regards playing an even bigger role than Peter himself. Yet, Peter David structures the story so well that readers can quickly understand why Jean mattered. Through flashbacks and dialogue, we learn about her upbringing and the complicated relationship she had with her family. Much of her drive to succeed in the NYPD came from a desire for their approval, and hope that one day, if she became chief of police, she might finally break that wall down. Tragically, that future was never meant when the Sin Eater murders her. What makes the story powerful is that it doesn't only dwell on Peter's grief. Instead, it expands the tragedy outward. The investigation forces Spider-Man to confront uncomfortable questions about justice and vigilantism. His anger pushes him towards brutality. Daredevil acts as a moral counterweight to Spider-Man. Matt Murdock believes the Sin Eater must face the legal system rather than Spider-Man's rage. The arc ultimately becomes less about a singular death and more about the consequences of taking justice into one's own hand. Spider-Man represents the emotional reaction to tragedy, while Daredevil represents restraint and faith in the law. Through their conflict, Peter David explores the flawed nature of the justice system and the burden vigilantes carry when they try to enforce it themselves. But speaking of iconic comics, that leads to the second method Douglas Walk outlines in his book. The idea of a canon is pretty simple. It's essentially the greatest hits of a comic book, the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Some of these runs are so beloved that they have dedicated hardcovers or even entire reading guides to help people navigate these overarching sagas. Though starting with these stories may seem logical, what's the point in dealing with just good or maybe even mediocre stories? I would honestly recommend this approach in most cases. It's a completely valid mindset to have. But what I will say, that doesn't mean there aren't certain drawbacks to this approach. You have to read bad books. It's weird to say, but I feel that to truly appreciate the heights of comics, you have to understand how low the bar can truly be. Trust me, I know. I'm an X-Men fan. Their quality doesn't exist in a vacuum, but rather the rest of the medium of itself. A lot of these iconic runs didn't just succeed because they were good. They succeeded because they were better than what the medium was used to. And if you start with these stories, you expect every single one to be at this level. And when you finally hit the average level of an issue, you'll be greatly disappointed. Plus, you may not understand everything the book is trying to say in the first place. I know I'm contradicting myself, but here's the thing. You may understand them on a fundamental level from A to B, but on a deeper level, and how they both correlate to the medium itself and the world around us, a lot of the greatest runs in history deconstruct, I'm sorry for using that word, what these characters are and act as more of an introspective lens to dissect them. Think of starting with Watchmen, a great book in its own right, but by knowing the Silver Age and how Watchmen interacts with both it on a meta level and how these character archetypes are used within the story as a lot of the characters in Watchmen were based on the old Charlton Comics characters. It makes an already great story into an amazing one because of that. Something that would be completely lost if you went into it without previous knowledge. To be completely blunt with you, the best is rarely objective. How will you know what the best is if you don't engage with a variety of the medium? By only knowing what people describe as the very best, you deprive yourself from finding that out by yourself. Your favorite comic may not even be considered an all-time great, and you would never find out if you only read what was told to be the very best. I mean, look at my favorite X-Men era, Krakoa, and oh boy, do I know a lot of people absolutely hate this era. And I get it, there's a lot of problems. But man, it's my favorite X-Men and I'll never deny that. But this is because it's my personal taste when it comes to comics. I like Krakoa for its socio-political exploration of a mutant culture built upon a post-scarcity world. Combined all aspects of mutant culture to build a society. Their moral struggle with perpetuating the same bigotry humanity held for them, but with AI. It's all really interesting to me as a reader, which maybe is the best way to read a comic. It's pretty simple. Instead of going out of your way at the very start, or the best, maybe just take a gander at the massive library that are comics and pick whatever piques your interest. It's already established that most of these stories are designed to be picked up as your very first, unless stated otherwise. Why not pick up something you already know is in your ballpark of what you like? Even if you end up not liking it, it's not that much of a time sink. Most issues are only 25 pages. If you like teams focused on drama and their interpersonal relationships that bring superheroes down to our level and examine their human side, Justice League International is right up your alley. It even has Booster Gold, you know, the character that everyone saw one TikTok edit of is now everyone's favorite superhero before they got popular. I cannot stress how impressive the entire Annihilation storyline is. It came right out before Civil War, and I'm not going to lie, in the long run, its highs are so much higher. And it leads into DNA's Guardians of the Galaxy, which I might say is one of the best Marvel books of all time. But what I'm saying is that there's a book for everyone. Hell, even if you want a book that looks like how to draw a manga, Marvel even has that. Even if you're not decisive, you can always ask a friend. I think a really lost part of the entire medium is sharing your experience with others. It's like sharing a piece of yourself with another person, a peek into their mind and what they like. I had a friend recommend me recommenders on Kenny X-Source, and I could really see what they enjoyed about this book so much. I really love how they tackled both Wolverine and Deadpool's characters. It's probably one of the few times I've really enjoyed Deadpool as a character. Seeing how the team struggles with how far is too far, and how each of the members cope with having to do the dirty work for mutant kind. After a really bad thing that happened that I cannot talk about without spoiling the entirety of the book, Betsy uses the Danger Room not to train for the next mission, hone her skills, or even hone her skills, but rather, she's preparing herself for the toughest battle, coming clean to her brother, telling him all the awful things she had to do for X-Force, and using the Danger Room to predict what Brian would say. It's a really sweet moment that not only shows how Betsy, but the rest of the X-Force, despite being trained killers, struggles with the reality of taking a life. But okay, if you don't have any friends, you're indecisive, and you live in a cave, here, I'm gonna lay out my suggestions, but it's gonna be pretty quick because it would be pretty boring just to hear what I like. Here are 5 comics that are pretty easy to get into and are pretty short in no discernible order. The Color series is a really great introduction to some of Marvel's most iconic characters. Spider-Man, the Hulk, Daredevil, Captain America. They've really honed in the characteristics that make these characters so great in each individual series. That after reading gives you a pretty good idea of what these characters represent and how their stories usually go. They're some of the most beloved series Marvel has ever put out, and the worst one being Captain America, as is just good, is a really great sign for any beginner. God Loves, Man Kills is the quintessential X-Men story. While he did previously set up the bigotry that mutants face, I feel like this story really cements that into the culture of comics. For better or for worse, depending on your opinion, but I do think the story relatively holds up besides some awkward moments. Mark Waid's Born to Run is one of my favorite Flash stories. It's a retelling of Wally West's origins. It does a really great job of differentiating Wally West and Barry Allen, which is a problem I think most writers face while writing these characters, as they kind of blend into one another. It's funny, emotional, and action-packed. Please read it. On the indie side, A Sorted Crisis event by Dennis Camp is a current ongoing at Image Comics. It's an anthology series that follows normal people suffering through time having a crisis. I know, weird description, but that's really the best way to put it. It uses high concept sci-fi ideas to really examine human nature and socio-political issues that happen in our real world, and I think Dennis Camp holds no punches when discussing these ideas. The final comic I'll talk about is probably more of a glup shido kind of comic, because I've been talking about mostly iconic runs, and I'm kind of going against what I've been saying, so here's a personal comic that I really like. Marvel Boy. It's a weird one, and it's written by Grant Morrison, with art done by J.G. Jones, which is probably one of my favorite parts of it. Grant Morrison and Jones talk about at length how they've really wanted to push like the medium comics and kind of go against the idea of how they're becoming more cinematic in the 2000s. In issue 2, I believe, there's this like alien bioweapon known as Company X that kind of like seeps into our world. And Novar himself, Marvel Boy, is not really a hero per se. He's more like an invading type who is pushing back against Earth. It's only 6 issues, so it's not that much of a read. It's really sad knowing the story of what happened. The Marvel kind of screwed over Grant Morrison, so he never got his second or third book for him. But again, that first book is really good. And with that, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for watching. This is kind of like a shorter, more rambling video before this really big project I'm working on. So if you like this video and want to know when that comes out, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment to boost me in the algorithm, you know. That's pretty cool. I'm really bad at this.